It was day 300 of my captivity under John Porter, the brilliantly unhinged billionaire, when a car crash wiped his memory. His personal secretary, upon finding me in the basement wearing solid gold ankle cuffs, practically shrieked in terror. He threw a cool $100 million and a private jet my way just to keep me quiet. The Porter Group's global offices are yours to command, ma'am. Just please, for the love of God, don't call the police. So, I happily spent the next 3 years flying around the world. But the moment I set foot back in the country, I ran straight into my former captor at the airport. Before panic could even set in, his eyes drifted right past me. Just as I let out a breath of relief, a black sack was shoved over my head the second I walked out of the terminal. When I opened my eyes again, I was staring at a very familiar, floor-to-ceiling glass wine cellar. Right next to it was a handwritten note in sharp, elegant cursive. Little bird, it was love at first sight. I will give you the world, on one condition, stay by my side. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Even with amnesia, this man still had a type, and apparently, it was still me. I ended up laughing anyway. John, that beautiful psycho, had fully restocked the wine cellar. The last time I was here, I had drunk my way through his 1982 Lafite collection, leaving only 3 bottles. Now, the wall was packed to the brim. I even spotted a bottle of 1947 Cheval Blanc, a legendary vintage that had vanished after failing to sell at auction years ago. Next to the rack, a note was taped to the glass. His handwriting, sharp and pressing into the paper, read, "Don't even think about running. Be a good girl and wait for me to come home." A dry chuckle escaped my throat. I was actually amused. 300 days of being locked up by a madman, only for him to lose his memory in an accident. His panicked secretary handed me a fortune and a private jet just to keep the cops out of it. I spent 3 years living the high life across the globe, yet within 3 hours of landing back home, I was bagged, tagged, and brought right back to this gilded cage. I didn't need 3 guesses to know who ordered this. Accepting my fate, I walked over to the cellar, pulled out the 47 Cheval Blanc, and began searching for a corkscrew. If I was going to miss my welcome home dinner because of a kidnapping, I might as well enjoy the finest wine on earth. What the hell do you think you're doing? A sharp, grating voice shattered the silence. I turned around. A woman dressed in high fashion, perched on red-soled Louboutins, stood at the double doors. She glared at me, her chin tilted so high she was practically looking down her nose. Her eyes treated me like a piece of absolute trash. "Did you hear me?" she snapped, her brow furrowing. "I heard you," I replied, slowly working the cork. "You asked what I'm doing. John is my fiancé. Our families are finalizing the alliance." She stepped into the room, a smug, triumphant smile playing on her lips. The match was handpicked by his grandmother, Mrs. Porter herself. "Who do you think you are, lounging in this villa and touching his private reserve?" Ah. A match arranged by his family. No wonder she was acting like she owned the place. But accusing me of seduction? That was just uncalled for. I was the victim here. Before I could explain, she kept going. "If you know what's good for you, take a check and get out. Touch what doesn't belong to you, and you'll find out how painful life can get." I agreed instantly. Deal. Let me out, and I'll be gone before you can count to 3. I had millions in the bank and a jet waiting at the hangar. The world was huge, and there was plenty of good wine out there. But my cooperation only seemed to make Bianca furious. She slammed her hand against the glass of the wine cellar. "Leave? You wish. You crawl into his bed, and now you think you can just walk away? Kneel," she demanded, drawing out the word. "Apologize. Right now, in front of the entire staff. Bow your head 3 times. The smile faded from my face. I wasn't angry, just a bit sorry for her. "About the kneeling," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I wouldn't push it if I were you. It won't end well." "Oh? And why is that?" I looked at her with pure, honest concern. "Because he will lose his mind." "Who?" "John," I sighed. "He's obsessed with me. Pathologically so. The last time a chauffeur looked at me for a second too long, he disappeared the next day. His very name was wiped from the payroll. So, if you force me to kneel, and he comes home to see that..." I let the threat hang. "I honestly don't want to think about what he'll do to you. I'm telling you this for your own good." Bianca stared at me in disbelief, then burst into a harsh, mocking laugh. "He'd lose his mind over you?" She laughed so hard her expensive jewelry clinked, her sharp nails nearly poking my cheek. "Look at yourself. Who do you think you are?" I kept quiet, letting a tiny, undeniable spark of anticipation settle in my chest. Meanwhile, the housekeepers standing near the door turned pale. One of them quietly slipped away, pulling out a phone and whispering urgently, "Mr. Harrison, you need to get back here right now. There's going to be a bloodbath." Bianca took my silence as submission. Her arrogance swelled, and she waved over 2 burly bodyguards. "Since she won't kneel on her own," she said, her tone as casual as ordering a salad, "make her. Break her legs if you have to. No one is going to miss a piece of trash like her." The guard stepped forward, grabbing my shoulders with a grip that made me wince. I didn't bother fighting back. They were professionals, and struggle was pointless. Besides, I caught the terrified look on the housekeeper's face. The person on the other end of the line had clearly issued a severe warning. I wouldn't have to lift a finger. At least you're smart enough not to struggle, Bianca sneered, pacing around me as the guards forced me down. Recognize your place yet? Listen to me. If you behave, maybe I'll throw some pocket change your way after this so you can buy some dignity on your way out. The guards pressed down, forcing my knees toward the cold marble floor. My knees hit the stone with a dull, painful thud. It hurt. I had spent 300 days in the basement of this very house. I could handle a little physical pain. What truly amused me was Bianca's increasingly dramatic performance. Tell me, she demanded, looking down at me. How did you seduce my fiancé? Give me every detail. Leave one thing out, and my men will add another bruise. I looked up, my expression perfectly flat. Are you sure you want to hear it? Spit it out. Fine, I said, my voice as dry as a financial report. He kept me locked in the basement of this villa for 300 days. He went through 3 different sets of ankle chains. The first was too heavy and chafed my skin, which broke his heart, so he replaced them with custom, velvet-lined gold cuffs. He hand-fed me every single meal. If I refused to eat, he would stay until he coaxed every bite down. When I said I wanted a drink, he moved his entire collection of vintage Lafite down to the cellar for me. Bianca's sneer flickered. I kept going, taking my time with each word. Then he got into a car crash and forgot who I was. When his assistant found me, the poor man almost had a stroke. He bribed me with $100 million and a private jet just to keep me from calling the cops. So, I looked her dead in the eye. Does that sound like seduction to you? Her face went pale, then flushed with anger. But she quickly clung back to her pride. What a ridiculous fairy tale. John Porter would never lower himself to do those things for someone like you. You're just taking advantage of his amnesia to spin some wild fantasy. I smiled. I really, truly wanted to laugh. Amnesia. So she knew about his memory loss. Then she must also know that during his recovery, the Porter family was an absolute circus, with every social climber and self-proclaimed fiancé trying to claim a piece of him. I had been back in the country for barely 3 hours before I was thrown into a sack. I knew exactly who had put me there. I'll give you one last piece of advice, I said, my voice softening with genuine pity. Walk out of that door before he gets home. You still have time. Otherwise. Otherwise what? Bianca shrieked. She raised her hand, aiming a vicious slap at my face. You cheap little. A hand clamped onto her wrist, stopping her mid-air with enough force to turn her fingers white. Bianca gasped in pain, turning to yell, which idiot dares to? Thomas? What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be with John? Thomas, the personal secretary, looked at me kneeling on the floor, his face drained of color. Miss Bianca, let her go. Please. If the boss finds out you made her kneel, he will destroy us all. But before he could even reach me, Bianca's guards blocked him. Are you in league with this trash, Thomas? She sneered. No wonder she had the nerve to slip into his bed. Thomas looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Miss Bianca, Mrs. Porter chose you, and I respect that. But this woman, the boss has been tearing the world apart looking for her for 3 long years. You cannot touch her. 3 years? Bianca scoffed. Since his accident, he's mistaken a dozen women for someone else. Why would she be any different? Because. Thomas stammered, unable to speak the unspeakable truths of John's obsession. You're just a glorified errand boy, Bianca said, her chin tilting up again. The match was blessed by Mrs. Porter. Why don't you go complain to her? If she gave me her blessing, who are you to tell me no? Thomas shut his mouth, defeated. He was just an employee, after all. Bianca had the matriarch's backing, and he couldn't override that authority. He looked at me with a helpless, pleading expression that said, I can't stop her, please just hang in there. I sighed, offering Bianca one last olive branch. Miss Bianca, you should listen to the secretary. While you still can. Shut up, you bitch. How dare you threaten me? Bianca snapped, breaking free and striking me across the face with a resounding slap. Thomas looked as if he had just watched a bomb go off. Miss Bianca, you struck her. So what if I did? The boss cannot stand to see a single scratch on her. Thomas's voice was shaking. Last time a driver merely stared at her, the boss personally broke his. He swallowed hard, unable to finish the sentence. You have no idea what he will do when he gets back. The sheer terror in the room only seemed to feed Bianca's spite. You're trying to scare me too, she hissed, glaring at Thomas. I wouldn't dare lie to you. Then shut up. She snatched a heavy metal baton from one of the bodyguard's belts, her eyes flashing with malice. I want to see exactly how crazy he gets for her. Seeing that she was beyond reason, Thomas backed away, frantically pulling out his phone and dialing. Sir. Wherever you are, you need to come back right now. Miss Bianca is going to hurt the lady you brought back, and I can't stop her. A heavy silence hung over the line for a fraction of a second. Then came a voice, low, icy, and so sharp it cut through the room even from several feet away. Who gave her permission to touch what is mine? A loud crack followed, the sound of plastic and glass being crushed under immense pressure. Thomas's face went completely gray. He lowered his phone, his knees trembling. The boss, he just crushed his phone. He said for no one to touch you, and that he's on his way. He looked at me like I was a saint who could save his soul, and then looked at Bianca like she was already in a coffin. For the first time, Bianca's confidence wavered, but only for a second. Bluffing, she spat, though her grip on the baton tightened. Who knows what's true from before his accident? Even if he comes back, I am the woman his mother chose. Would he really destroy his own family for a mistress? He would, I said softly. What did you say? I said, he would. I swirled the wine in my glass. Believe me or not. You'll find out soon enough. My calm demeanor pushed her over the edge. Hold her down, she ordered, thrusting the baton into a guard's hand. Beat her until she begs. Miss Bianca. No. Thomas threw himself to the ground, crawling to block the guard. He's been searching for her for 3 years. During his recovery, he locked himself in that basement every single day. He searched every flight manifest, every vineyard, every customs record across the globe just to find her. If you touch her, someone is going to die today. The servants in the room dropped to their knees, trembling like autumn leaves in a storm. The collective terror in the room was louder than any warning. Bianca's hands shook, the weight of their fear finally registering. Are you all insane? She stammered, looking around. Frightened of a common whore? No one dared to answer. I spoke up, my voice quiet but cutting through the silence. Every single thing you do to me right now will be returned to you tenfold when he walks through that door. He doesn't forgive. Bianca stared at me, her chest heaving. Finally, pushed to the brink of madness, she threw the baton aside and reached into her designer bag, pulling out a small, gleaming utility knife. A beating is too good for you, she whispered, her eyes shining with a frantic, unstable light. John loves this face of yours. Let's see how much he loves it when I slice it open. Let's see if he still loses his mind for a monster. Thomas shrieked, Miss Bianca. Stop. Outside, the violent, screeching sound of tires tearing asphalt shattered the air. Bianca didn't stop. If anything, the sound of his arrival made her panic, driving her to finish what she started before he could walk through the door. Hold her. Don't let her move, she screamed. The 2 guards clamped their hands around my jaw, forcing my head back. The cold, silver tip of the blade drifted inches from my cheek. Let me go now, and I won't tell him, I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. Your last chance. Too late, Bianca whispered, leaning in close, her breath cold against my skin. I'll only ruin half. I want to leave enough so he knows exactly what you used to look like. He'll be devastated, she laughed. It'll be beautiful. The moment the cold metal touched my skin, a strong, pale hand reached from behind, gripping her wrist with the force of an iron vice. Bianca cried out as her bones groaned under the pressure, the utility knife clattering to the marble floor. John stood behind her. He wore a dark tailored suit, looking disheveled, his tie loosened, his eyes shot through with exhaustion. But those eyes were colder than a winter grave, sending a physical chill through the room. He didn't look at Bianca. He stepped past her, dropping to his knees in front of me. His hands, trembling slightly, cradled my face, his fingers tracing my skin with agonizing gentleness. He was checking to make sure the blade hadn't left a mark. Once he was sure I was untouched, his chest heaved, his breathing ragged. Does it hurt? He whispered, his voice cracking. She slapped me, I said calmly. And she tried to ruin my face. John's grip on my jaw tightened ever so slightly, his knuckles turning white. He stood up slowly, turning his gaze to Bianca. The words that left his lips made everyone's heart stop cold. Then I will make sure her entire family begs for death. With a single look, Bianca's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the floor. The silence in the room wasn't just quiet, it was heavy enough to crush bone. John didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam anything. He simply stood up, smoothing the front of his dark suit jacket with long, methodical fingers. The sheer contrast between his pristine posture and the icy death sentence hanging in the air made the room feel as though the temperature had dropped below zero. Bianca was frozen on the marble floor, her expensive crimson saul sprawling uselessly beneath her. The color had drained so completely from her face that her designer foundation looked like cracked plaster. John. She squeaked, her voice trembling like a snapped wire. John. Please, you don't understand. She's an imposter. She was drinking your private reserve. Your grandmother. John didn't look at her face. His eyes slowly dragged down to her right hand, the hand that had held the utility knife. Thomas, John said softly. His tone was almost casual, as if he were asking for the morning papers. Thomas, who had been trying to shrink into the grain of the wood paneling, stepped forward immediately, bowing his head. Yes, Mr. Porter. The Vance Group, John murmured, his thumb gently caressing the side of my face, where Bianca's hand had struck me. His touch was burning hot compared to his voice. How much of their liquid capital is currently tied up in the Northern Harbor development? Thomas didn't even need to check his tablet. 68%, sir. They overextended their credit lines to match our bid. Short every stock they hold by market open tomorrow, John said quietly. Recall the bank loans we guaranteed for her father last quarter. Terminate the joint venture in Singapore. By noon, I want the Vance family name erased from the exchange. Bianca gasped, a wet, choking sound. You can't. That's my family's entire life's work. Over her? John finally turned his eyes toward her. There was no anger in them. Worse. There was absolute nothingness, the look a boy gives an ant before stepping on it. You brought steel within 3 inches of her skin, John whispered. I am being merciful by only taking your money. He flicked his gaze to the 2 heavy-set bodyguards who were still frozen, their hands hovering uselessly. Break their hands, John instructed Thomas coldly. Then throw them out of my gates. The guards didn't even fight. They knew who John Porter was. In this city, John Porter's security team was better equipped and far less forgiving than the local police department. Within seconds, Thomas signaled the house guard stationed outside. The room echoed with muffled scuffles, the blunt, sickening sound of fracturing bone, and then the heavy doors clicked shut once more. The living room fell dead quiet again, save for Bianca's muffled, hysterical sobbing on the floor. I took another small sip from my glass of 1947 Cheval Blanc. The earthiness of the vintage hit my tongue, smooth, rich, and ridiculously expensive. John, I spoke up, breaking the oppressive air. Your floor is getting messy. And my wine is getting warm. The terrifying, demonic presence radiating off John vanished instantly. He turned back to me, his dark eyes instantly softening into that terrifying, puppy-like desperation I knew all too well from 3 years ago. He dropped to one knee in front of my chair. Without asking, he reached down, took off my left shoe, and cradled my ankle in his palm, checking the red marks left by the guards. They hurt you, he murmured, his thumb rubbing over my skin. I was 20 minutes too late. I told her you'd lose your mind, I said dryly, swirling the red liquid in my glass. She didn't listen. Honestly, John, you really need to screen your fiancé's better. Her taste in footwear is terrible, and her threat delivery is horribly cliché. Bianca looked up from the floor, her eyes wide with horrified disbelief as she watched the most feared corporate dictator in the hemisphere practically purr at my feet. Get her out of my sight, John said without looking back. Thomas gestured, and 2 firm-faced maids quickly dragged Bianca out of the room, her terrified wails fading down the long, gilded corridor. Once the double doors slammed shut, John leaned his forehead against my knee. He took a deep, ragged breath, inhaling the scent of my perfume as if he had been drowning for 3 years and had finally breached the surface. I found you, he whispered into the fabric of my trousers. You ran so far. Little bird. 3 years, 3 entire years. I looked down at the dark, thick hair at the crown of his head. I felt a strange mixture of amusement and exhaustion. John, I sighed, setting my wine glass on the side table. You have amnesia. You don't even remember why you locked me up in the first place. He raised his head, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that could melt iron. His jaw set firmly. I don't need memories to know what belongs to me, he said fiercely. The moment I woke up in that hospital 3 years ago, my heart felt hollowed out. There was an outline of a person etched into my soul, and every woman my family brought to me felt like broken glass. But the moment my men showed me the airport security footage today, he took my hand, placing it directly over his chest. His heart was hammering like a trapped bird. My heart remembered, he whispered softly. Even if my brain forgot. I stared at him. The man was nuts. Absolutely, irrevocably insane. And yet, sitting there in his multi-million-dollar villa, drinking a wine that cost more than a luxury sedan, I couldn't help the small, wicked smile that crept onto my lips. Well, I said, leaning back into the leather armchair. At least you restocked the wine cellar. By midnight, the villa had returned to a state of eerie, quiet perfection. The bloodstains on the marble had been scrubbed clean by a silent crew of maids. The Vance family stocks were already tumbling in late-night overseas trading. News outlets reporting a sudden restructuring of their core partnerships. And I was back in the master suite. It wasn't the basement this time. Apparently, John's subconscious had decided that 300 days beneath the floorboards was a bit uncouth for his returned love. Instead, he had placed me in the penthouse suite on the top Floor of the estate, a sprawling, glass-walled paradise overlooking the ocean. The glass, of course, was triple reinforced ballistics material. The balcony. Doors locked electronically from the outside. The suite was a gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. I was lying on the massive, silk-sheeted king bed, flipping through a luxury magazine, when the door chimed and slid open softly. John walked in. He had showered and changed into a dark gray cashmere sweater and trousers. He carried a silver tray containing a bowl of fresh, organic strawberries, a small pot of clotted cream, and a freshly opened bottle of Chateau Margaux. "You didn't eat dinner," he said gently, setting the tray down on the nightstand beside me. I was busy being threatened with a utility knife, I pointed out, not looking up from my magazine. "It tends to kill the appetite." John's posture stiffened slightly, a flash of dark guilt crossing his sharp features. He sat on the edge of the bed, pulling the tray closer. He picked up a strawberry, dipped it carefully into the cream, and held it up to my lips. I stared at the strawberry. Then I looked at him. "Are we really doing this again, John? Hand feeding?" "You're thin," he said, his tone uncompromising. "You lost weight while you were flying around the world." "I was living on tapas and champagne in Ibiza," I said. "I was doing just fine." "Eat," he commanded softly, but his eyes held an agonizing plea. I sighed, leaned forward, and took the strawberry from his fingers. He watched my lips move with an intensity that felt almost physical, his thumb reaching out to brush a stray crumb of cream from the corner of my mouth. He put his thumb in his own mouth, tasting it, his eyes never leaving mine. "You're a sick man, Porter," I muttered, though I didn't pull away. "I know," he agreed without a moment's hesitation. "When Thomas told me 3 years ago that I had paid you $100 million to leave, I nearly killed him." I paused, chewing slowly. "Thomas told you?" "Eventually," John said, a dark scowl touching his lips. "It took me 6 months of torture, metaphorically speaking, to extract the truth from him. He thought he was protecting me from a scandal. He thought you were a curse." "I am a curse," I reminded him cheerfully. "I drank 80 grand worth of your wine last time I was here. And I took your jet." "You can have the jet. You can have the fleet," John said, leaning closer, his face inches from mine. "You can burn my entire corporate empire to the ground. Vivian. I don't care about the money. I never did." "Then what do you care about?" "You," he said simply. "Staying here. In my sight. Where I know you're breathing." I looked into his eyes. There was no deceit there. That was the most terrifying thing about John Porter. He wasn't a mustache-twirling villain playing a game. He was a man possessed by an absolute, singular obsession. "What happens when your grandmother finds out about Bianca?" I asked, shifting the subject. "Thomas said Mrs. Porter handpicked her. The old matriarch isn't going to take kindly to you destroying her prized socialite over a nobody who spent 300 days in your basement." John's jaw tightened. The warm tenderness in his posture chilled slightly. "My grandmother is old," John said coldly. "She belongs to a generation that believes people are pieces on a chessboard. She thought my amnesia was an opportunity to reset my life, to scrub you out of my history and paste a proper heiress into my bed." He reached out, his hand wrapping gently around the back of my neck, his fingers tangling into my hair. He pulled me forward until our foreheads brushed. "She made a fatal mistake," John whispered. "She mistook my memory loss for a change of heart. Tomorrow, she will learn that my heart doesn't belong to the Porter family. It belongs to you." Before I could reply, my phone, which John had miraculously allowed me to keep, albeit heavily tracked, began to ring on the nightstand. I looked at the screen. Caller ID, unknown. John glanced at the phone, his brow furrowing. I picked it up and swiped accept, putting it on speaker. "Vivian," a sharp, ancient, yet deeply commanding voice echoed through the speaker. It sounded like dry leaves scraping over marble. "I see you have returned from your expensive little vacation." John's grip on my neck tightened slightly. His eyes darkened. "Grandmother." A cold chuckle sounded from the other end of the line. "Ah, John. I see you are already at her side. Splendid. You always were so predictably primal when it came to that girl." "You sent Bianca into my home," John said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "You told her she could touch what's mine." "I sent a suitable woman to remind you of your duties," the old woman replied smoothly. "And instead of performing those duties, you just bankrupted the Vance family overnight. Do you have any idea the political fallout our board is facing right now?" "I don't care about the board," John said. "You will," Mrs. Porter replied, her voice dropping all pretense of warmth. Because if you do not bring that girl to the Porter family summit this Friday and publicly announce your engagement to a proper match, I will execute the secondary clause of your grandfather's will. I will freeze your control over the voting shares. A thick silence fell over the room. I raised an eyebrow at John. Losing voting control of the Porter group meant losing his kingdom, the very empire that gave him the power to kidnap people and buy off governments. Are you threatening me, old woman? John asked softly. I am giving you a choice, my dear boy, Mrs. Porter said sharply. Bring your little mistress to the summit. Let the high society see what kind of trash you traded the Vance family for. Let us see if she can survive one night among real wolves. Or lose your throne. The line went dead. I looked at the silent phone, then back at John, who looked ready to tear the city apart with his bare hands. Well, I said, leaning back against the pillows and taking another bite of my strawberry. It sounds like I need to buy a dress. The next morning, the villa was a hive of frantic activity. Thomas looked like a man who had been dragged through a hedge backward. He stood in the center of the living room, holding 3 different tablets, barking orders at stylists, tailors, and security personnel who were shuffling rack after rack of haute couture through the grand foyer. Not that one. Too subtle. The boss wants her looking like royalty. Thomas yelled at a trembling French designer. No, not white. White looks too innocent. Something that screams, I could buy your family and sell them for scrap. I sat at the breakfast bar in a plush bathrobe, sipping black coffee and watching the chaos with mild amusement. You look stressed, Thomas, I called out. Thomas turned around, looking at me with dark circles under his eyes. He practically sprinted over to the counter, collapsing against it. Miss Vivian, please, I beg of you, give me some mercy, Thomas whimpered softly. So the staff couldn't hear. The boss hasn't slept a wink. He spent the entire night in his office restructuring the board's legal assets. He's preparing for an all-out war with his grandmother. And Bianca? I asked. Thomas shuddered. The Vance Group filed for bankruptcy protection at 8 a.m. Her father is currently undergoing an emergency tax audit, and Bianca's passport has been revoked due to pending civil litigation. She's trapped in her penthouse, crying to the press, but no news outlet dares to print her story. Mr. Porter bought the 3 largest media conglomerates in the city by breakfast. I took another sip of coffee. Remind me never to make him mad. You're the only person on earth who can make him mad and survive it. Thomas whispered frantically. Miss Vivian, 3 years ago, when I gave you that 100 million and the jet, I thought I was saving you. I thought I was letting you escape a monster. You did, I said reasonably. I had a great time in France. The wine was fantastic. No. Thomas groaned, rubbing his temples. You don't understand. When he woke up from that accident, he wasn't human anymore. Without you here to act as his leash, he turned into a total lunatic. He worked 80-hour weeks, destroyed 3 rival corporations, and spent his weekends sitting in that empty basement room staring at your gold ankle cuffs. I choked slightly on my coffee. He did what? He kept the cuffs. Thomas hissed. He had them polished every week. He's completely unhinged, Miss Vivian. If you leave him again, I honestly think he'll burn the city down just to see the smoke. Before I could process that horrifying mental image, heavy footsteps echoed down the grand staircase. John stepped into the light. He looked immaculate, tailored dark suit, silver cufflinks, hair combed back perfectly. But his eyes immediately locked onto me, scanning my face, my hands, my neck, checking for any sign of distress. Is the coffee to your liking? He asked, walking over and placing a firm, warm hand on the small of my back. It's fine, John, I said. Thomas was just telling me about your weird basement ritual. Thomas went pale as snow and looked like he wanted to jump out the floor-to-ceiling window. John didn't even blink. He glared at Thomas, who immediately bowed and scurried off toward the designers. Then, John turned back to me, his fingers lightly gripping my waist, pulling me off the stool until I was standing between his knees. It wasn't a ritual, John murmured softly, his eyes searching mine. It was a reminder. A reminder that I had let the most precious thing in my life slip away. Because I was weak enough to get into a car crash. John, I said, putting my hands against his broad chest. You realize normal people don't keep hostage restraints as keepsakes, right? We are not normal people, he said simply. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a long, velvet jewelry box. He clicked it open. Inside sat a choker necklace made of solid platinum, encrusted with rare Blood-red diamonds. It was mesmerizing, exquisite, and undeniably heavy. It looked remarkably like a collar. For Friday, John said softly, lifting the necklace from the velvet. My grandmother thinks she can humiliate you at the summit. She thinks she can treat you like an outsider. He stepped behind me, lifting my hair, his cold fingers brushing against the sensitive skin of my nape. The weight of the platinum settled against my collarbone. He fastened the clasp with a decisive click. When you wear this, John whispered in my ear, his breath warm and dangerous. Everyone in that room will know that touching you means war with me. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the kitchen window. The red diamonds caught the morning sun, glinting like fresh drops of blood against my pale skin. It was a statement. A declaration of possession. It's heavy, I remarked dryly. John wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, pulling me flush against his chest, burying his face in the crook of my neck. Then let me carry the weight for you, he whispered. Friday evening arrived with the atmosphere of an impending execution. The Porter family summit wasn't held in a hotel ballroom. It was held at the Citadel, a private, cliffside estate perched over the roaring waves of the Atlantic, owned by the family for generations. It was where the Porters settled their internal disputes, arranged political marriages, and carved up multi-billion-dollar corporate stakes away from the eyes of the public. Our limousine pulled up the long, winding driveway flanked by armed security and paparazzi who were kept back behind heavy iron gates. I sat beside John, wearing a custom, floor-length gown of emerald green silk. The dress was sleek, backless, and dangerously elegant, serving as the perfect backdrop for the blood-red diamond collar resting snugly around my throat. John held my hand the entire ride. His grip was tight, almost painfully so, as if he feared that if he let go for a single second, would dissolve into thin air. Again. Are you nervous? He asked, his dark eyes studying my face as the car came to a stop in front of the grand stone steps. Nervous? I smirked, adjusting the strap of my gown. John, I spent 300 days in your basement while you threatened to execute anyone who didn't cook my steaks medium rare. A room full of snobby billionaires in tuxedos. Doesn't scare me. A rare, genuine laugh broke through John's stoic expression. He leaned over, pressing a firm, lingering kiss against my knuckles. That's my girl, he murmured. The valet opened the door. John stepped out first, offering his hand to assist me. The moment my heels touched the red carpet, a sea of whispers rippled through the gathered crowd of high society elites, corporate titans, and family members. Standing on the terrace. Is that her? The girl from the airport? I heard she destroyed the Vance family in a single morning. Look at the necklace, those are the Romanov rubies. I kept my head held high, my face a mask of cool, unbothered confidence. I leaned lightly into John's side, feeling the tense power radiating from his body. We entered the grand ballroom. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, and a crowd of people dressed in millions of dollars worth of diamonds, yet the energy in the room was as hostile as a war zone. At the far end of the ballroom, sitting on a high-backed mahogany chair like a queen on a throne, was Mrs. Porter. She wore a stark black lace gown, her white hair styled in an intricate bun. Beside her stood several senior board members of the Porter Group, along with a few young, eligible heiresses who looked at me with sharp, venomous glares. As John and I walked down the center of the room, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Grandmother, John said smoothly as we reached the foot of her small dais. He didn't bow. He didn't offer a polite greeting. He simply stood there, his arm wrapped firmly around my waist. Mrs. Porter's sharp, dark eyes drifted slowly from John down to me. She looked at the red diamond collar on my neck, her lips curling into a tight, disgusted sneer. So, Mrs. Porter said, her voice cutting through the quiet room. This is the gutter trash you've decided to drag into our sanctuary, John. The ballroom went deathly quiet. Several socialites gasped softly. John's eyes flickered with a terrifying, predatory light. His jaw flexed, his hand tightening on my hip. Before John could speak, before he could tear the room apart, I stepped forward. Half a pace, smiling serenely at the old matriarch. Mrs. Porter, I said, my voice smooth, clear, and perfectly modulated. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I must thank you for the hospitality. The old woman narrowed her eyes. Hospitality? You are an uninvited parasite. Girl. You seduced my grandson, exploited his medical misfortune, and stole $100 million from our treasury 3 years ago. You belong in a prison cell, not in the Citadel. The board members behind her muttered in agreement, casting dark glances at me. I laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh, it was a soft, genuine, melodic laugh that echoed through the quiet room. Seduced? I asked, looking up at John with an affectionate, mocking glint in my eyes. Mrs. Porter, your grandson locked me in a basement for 300 days. Because he couldn't handle me saying no to a second date. He bought me solid gold ankle cuffs. He brought his entire vintage wine collection downstairs just so I wouldn't get bored. The crowd murmured loudly. Mrs. Porter's face twitched. And as for the $100 million? I continued, taking a step closer to her chair. Your personal secretary threw that money at my feet to stop me from calling the federal authorities and having your golden boy thrown into a psychiatric facility. I leaned in slightly, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that only she and the board members could hear. If I wanted to destroy the Porter family, Mrs. Porter, I wouldn't do it with stock shorts. I would do it with the 300 days of security footage I backed up to a private cloud server before I left the country. Mrs. Porter went entirely stiff. Her hands, resting on her silver cane, tightened until her knuckles turned yellow. You're bluffing, she hissed. Try me, I whispered back, my smile widening. Ask Thomas if I'm bluffing. He watched me copy the files. Behind us, Thomas, who was standing near the entrance, suddenly pulled his collar nervously and looked away. John looked down at me, a mixture of absolute shock and raw, unfiltered adoration sweeping across his face. He hadn't known about the cloud backup. He didn't care about the leverage, he was simply utterly enchanted by the fact that I had matched his grandmother's venom drop for drop. She isn't bluffing, grandmother, John said, stepping up beside me and placing his hand over mine. And if you ever speak to my future wife like that again, I won't just short your favorite charities. I will liquidate every family trust under your name. Mrs. Porter stared at the two of us. For the first time in her 80 years of life, the matriarch of the Porter Empire looked genuinely shaken. You fool, she whispered furiously at John. She doesn't love you. She's using you. She's holding a knife to your throat. John looked down at me, his eyes dark, deep, and hopelessly lost. Then let her cut, John said softly. The summit dissolved into a tense, chaotic affair. While the board members scattered into private corner huddles to discuss the sudden shift in power, John was forced to step into the private library with 3 major European shareholders to finalize a crucial voting proxy. He didn't want to leave my side, he practically had to be dragged away by Thomas, but I assured him I would stay on the ocean terrace, surrounded by 4 of his personal bodyguards. If anyone comes within 5 feet of you, shoot them, John ordered his head of security before entering the library. John, go do your business meeting, I scolded him gently. I'll be fine. I walked out onto the stone terrace. The cool Atlantic night air felt refreshing after the stifling hostility of the ballroom. Below the cliff, the dark ocean. Waves crashed violently against the jagged rocks. I stood near the stone balustrade, holding a glass of sparkling water, enjoying the solitude. You really are a piece of work, aren't you? I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The sharp scent of overly expensive floral perfume gave her away. Bianca stood at the terrace doors. She looked terrible. She was wearing a simple black dress, her hair slightly disheveled, her eyes bloodshot and swollen from days of crying. She didn't have her usual entourage. She was alone, slipping past the guards who were distracted by the family drama inside. Bianca, I said calmly, taking a sip of my water. I thought your passport was revoked. Shouldn't you be talking to your family's bankruptcy lawyers? You ruined us, Bianca hissed, her voice trembling with a terrifying, unhinged rage. She stepped onto the terrace, her hands hidden behind her back. In 3 days, you destroyed 30 years of my father's hard work. John ruined everything because of you. John ruined everything because you brought a knife to a domestic dispute, I corrected her coldly. You brought this on yourself. My family gave everything to the Porters, she screamed, taking another step closer. Mrs. Porter promised me I would be the queen of this empire. And then you, a nobody, a prisoner. Stand back, ma'am, John's head of security warned, stepping forward to block her path. Bianca suddenly produced a small, silver remote control from behind her back and pressed a red button. A deafening siren blared across the entire estate. Panic erupted inside the ballroom as the emergency fire shutters began to slam down over the glass doors, separating the terrace from the main hall. Before the guards could react, 3 men in dark tactical gear stepped out from the shadowed gardens of the terrace. They were hired mercenaries, Bianca's desperate, illegal final play. A silenced gunshot echoed through the night air. John's head security guard collapsed, shot in the leg. The other 3 guards drew their weapons, but the mercenaries rushed them, engaging in a brutal close-quarters brawl on the slippery stone terrace. I didn't panic. I dropped my glass of water, watching it shatter on the stone. Bianca lunged at me, her hands reaching for my throat. If I can't have him, you won't live to enjoy him. I stepped aside effortlessly, extending my foot. Bianca tripped over her own heels, slamming hard onto the marble floor, just as she had 3 days ago in the villa. You really need to work on your balance, I remarked, grabbing a heavy silver ice bucket from a nearby catering table. Bianca scrambled up, her face twisted in demonic fury, pulling a small glass vial from her pocket. It's over. I'm taking you down with me. She uncapped the vial, intending to splash what looked like high-concentration industrial acid toward my face. Before she could throw it, a heavy wooden door to the terrace slammed open with enough force to splinter the frame. John materialized like an angry deity. He didn't wait for his security. He didn't issue a warning. He sprinted across the terrace, his eyes blazing with pure, lethal fury. He caught Bianca by the throat mid-stride, his momentum slamming her hard against the stone balustrade overlooking the crashing ocean waves below. The glass vial slipped from her fingers, shattering on the stone and sizzling violently as the acid ate through the marble. Bianca choked, her legs dangling uselessly over the edge of the 200-foot cliff. John, she gasped, her eyes bulging with terror as she looked down at the dark, boiling sea below. John, please. John's grip didn't loosen. His face was entirely devoid of human emotion. He looked like a creature born from the dark sea below, ready to drag her into the abyss. I warned you, John whispered, his voice lower and colder than the ocean wind. I told you what would happen if you touched her again. John. I called out, stepping closer. John didn't look back at me. Don't look, Vivian. This will be over in a second. He shifted his grip, preparing to tilt her body over the edge. John, stop. I commanded, my voice sharp, authoritative, and ringingly clear. Over the wind. He froze. Slowly, agonizingly, John turned his head to look at me. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, filled with the dark madness that had driven him to lock me in a basement 3 years ago. She tried to ruin your face again, John snarled, his fingers digging into Bianca's neck. She has to die. If you throw her off that cliff, you go to prison, I said calmly, taking a step toward him, my silk dress blowing in the wind. And if you go to prison, who's going to keep me locked in your penthouse? John blinked. The sheer, absurd logic of my statement seemed to short-circuit his crazed brain. You want to stay in the penthouse, he stammered, his lethal focus wavering. I like the penthouse, I said smoothly, coming to a stop right beside him. The wine selection is better than the basement. But I can't stay there if you're doing 50 years in a federal penitentiary for murder. I reached out, placing my hand over his white-knuckled grip on Bianca's throat. Let her go, John, I whispered softly. Let the police take her. She's already ruined. Death is too easy for her anyway. John stared at me for 3 long seconds. The dark, terrifying hurricane in his eyes slowly receded, replaced by that hopeless, helpless devotion. With a disgusted grunt, he hauled Bianca back over the ledge and slammed her onto the stone floor. She curled into a ball, coughing violently, weeping uncontrollably as the estate's secondary security team finally broke through the fire doors and swarmed the terrace. John didn't look at Bianca again. He didn't look at the guards. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me hard into his chest, burying his face in my hair, his body trembling violently. You're safe, he repeated over and over like a mantra, his hands clutching my back so tightly I could barely breathe. You're safe. I have you. I have you. I rested my chin on his shoulder, looking over at Mrs. Porter, who had just stepped onto the terrace with the police officers in tow. The old woman looked broken, watching her grand design collapse into ruins. I gave the old matriarch a small, victorious smile. Then, I wrapped my arms around the beautiful, terrifying madman who held me, and squeezed back. 2 weeks later. The news of the Citadel incident had been scrubbed from the press, but the high society underground was buzzing with the aftermath. Bianca Vance was facing multiple charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, and corporate sabotage. Her family's business was completely liquidated, their name erased from the city's social register. Mrs. Porter had officially retired to a medical retreat in Switzerland, resigning her position on the board of directors. Control of the Porter Group was now absolute, unified entirely under John's solitary command. And as for me, I was sitting on the sunlit balcony of the penthouse estate, wearing a silk robe, sipping a glass of 1982 Lafite, a bottle John had personally tracked down from a private collector in London to replace the ones I drank 3 years ago. The balcony door slid open softly. John stepped out. He wasn't wearing a suit today. Just a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking relaxed, younger, and impossibly handsome in the morning light. He walked over, sliding his hands down my shoulders, leaning over to press a soft kiss against the side of my neck. Thomas brought the updated flight schedules, John murmured into my skin. The private jet is fueled and ready on the tarmac. I tilted my head back, looking up at him. Where are we going? Wherever you want, John said softly. Paris. Tuscany. Tokyo. You spent 3 years flying around the world alone. Now, I want to see it with you. I raised an eyebrow, swirling the red wine in my glass. Are you taking me on a vacation, John? Or is this just a mobile captivity? John let out a low, dark chuckle. He pulled a key out of his pocket, a small, solid gold key, and placed it gently on the small glass table beside my wine. It was the key to the electronic security lock of the penthouse. You're not my prisoner, Vivian, John whispered, his hands moving down to rest over mine. You never were. You were the only thing in this world that I couldn't buy, couldn't control, and couldn't replace. He dropped to one knee beside my lounger, looking up at me with those intense, dark eyes that had once terrified me, but now felt as familiar as home. 300 days in that basement, John said softly. I thought I was trapping you. But the truth is, I was the one trapped in your spell. When I lost my memory, my mind forgot your name, but my soul spent 3 years searching for its cage. He took my hand, pressing a firm kiss into my palm. If you want to walk away today, the jet is yours. The 100 million is still in your account. I won't follow you. I stared at the gold key sitting on the table. Then I looked down at the billionaire on his knees in front of me, a man who could bow the world to his will, yet begged for my presence like a starving man begging for bread. I let out a soft, dry laugh. I reached out, picked up the gold key, and dropped it straight into my glass of 1982 Lafite. It sank to the bottom with a quiet clink. John stared at the glass, his eyes widening in shock. Why did you do that? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. Because, I said, leaning forward and cupping his sharp jaw in my hands, if I'm going to spend the rest of my life dealing with a beautiful, unhinged psycho like you, I'm going to need a much better wine collection. John stared at me for a split second, before a stunning, radiant smile broke across his face. He pulled me down into a deep, desperate, possessive kiss, a kiss that tasted of rich red wine, dark promises, and a love that was far too crazy for this ordinary world. Outside, the ocean roared against the cliffs, vast and free. But right here, in this gilded cage, I had finally found the one thing money couldn't buy, a monster who belonged entirely to me.